Standing Order 36, and I call Deputy Louise O'Reilly.
Minister, this morning pilots at Aer Lingus have started industrial action in the form of a work to rule. As a consequence, Aer Lingus has already cancelled almost 300 flights, with more to follow. The impact that the work to rule, and specifically the ban on overtime, will have is difficult to predict, and passengers have been warned that they may have flights cancelled right up to the moment that they arrive at the departure gates. This has upended the holiday plans of tens of thousands of workers and families, many of whom can scarcely afford to rearrange these plans. And let's be honest, Minister, people have worked hard all year. They have booked their annual leave, their 2 weeks off. They're now faced with the prospect of having to tell their employer that they might need more annual leave, and more importantly, tell the kids that the holiday is cancelled. They've been looking forward to this all year, Minister. Many in our tourism sector are extremely concerned, and this industrial action presents the prospect of serious problems for our economy and our connectivity as an island. Minister, we're only a small island. Connectivity is absolutely everything. The consequences of this industrial action will be wide-ranging. Those working in the tourism sector will tell you that they've seen a slowdown in bookings for weeks, and they're now braced for cancellations. They are only just getting back on their feet after COVID and all of the other challenges that they faced in the recent past. They need a good season this year. The overdependence on overtime in Aer Lingus means that the impact of a work to rule could be almost as disruptive as a full strike, which we know will be happening on Saturday unless there is a resolution. This is not a run-of-the-mill industrial relations dispute. It is a matter of significant national importance, and the government's hands-off approach up to now in helping to achieve a resolution has been disappointing, to say the least. It is, in fact, Minister, a dereliction of your duty on behalf of passengers and businesses alike. We have been raising this issue for weeks now. A week ago, Minister, I wrote to the Taoiseach urging him to make a decisive intervention. I got a hold and reply, but as yet, I haven't had an answer. This isn't good enough. It's not good enough at all. The Labour Court were only going to intervene if there was a reasonable prospect of them being able to mediate a resolution. And I don't think that this was ever likely at this stage. This was pointed out to you in the Dáil here last Thursday and confirmed yesterday by the Labour Court. It is incumbent on government to intervene now. Given the seriousness of this dispute for families and for the wider economy, there is a need for the Minister for Enterprise and the Minister for Transport to engage in a constructive manner to get all sides around the table immediately. Every influence needs to be brought to bear to turn things around and ensure a resolution. The key is getting both parties at the table with meaningful objectives and a willingness to strike an agreement. This is far too important not to intervene. It's far too serious to simply look the other way. And Minister, you have to accept that your hands-off approach up to now isn't working. Minister, can I ask you, what does the government plan to do to ensure that this dispute is resolved and resolved speedily? And Minister, I'm fairly sure your constituency office is as busy as mine is, and people are starting to ring now. They want to know what it is that the government are prepared to do. Are the government prepared to take any action to ensure that they get the parties around the table and that a resolution is reached? There are now less than 3 days left to avert the strike action which will be taking place this coming Saturday. People are watching, Minister. They want to know, does the government intend to intervene, or will they simply stand by and watch as thousands of people have their holiday plans ruined and people face into a very uncertain season in the tourism sector?
Thank you, Deputy O'Reilly. Minister Humphreys.
And just before I answer the question, would you mind if I just paid a short tribute to the late Tommy Gorman? And I have to say it was with shock and sadness that we learned of Tommy's sudden passing yesterday. And can I just say that Tommy was a true professional and an absolute gentleman. Outside of his job as an RTE correspondent, he really had a genuine interest in the Northern Ireland peace process. You know, even though he was retired, he continued to build relationships and break down barriers. And nobody was more committed to public service broadcasting than Tommy. And like a number of us in this House, it was with great pride that he showed us around his beloved Sligo Rovers and indeed show us their ambitious plans for the future. So, Tommy, I'm sure you'll be steering the plans from on high, and I just want to extend our sympathies to his family. And what do I say? Only goodbye to Tommy, our pal. Now, Deputy, just in relation to the question you've raised, can I just say that I fully understand how frustrating and upsetting it is for many people who are now potentially unable to go on holidays, they're unable to get married or travel for important work reasons. And yesterday the Labour Court met with each party for a briefing on their perspectives and does not believe at this time that any efforts on its part will assist the parties in finding a resolution to their dispute. The Labour Court remains available to the parties, and the situation will be reviewed comprehensively on Monday the 1st of July, and the Court has urged the parties to desist from any further escalation of the dispute in the meantime. The government was jointly requested the Labour Court was jointly requested to investigate this trade dispute by Aer Lingus and the Forza Trade Union. That happened, and I understand that the Court on the 23rd of May issued an interim recommendation to stabilise the situation while engagement continued. The interim recommendation of the Court was, as I understand it, rejected by the Forza Trade Union. The Court remains available to the parties and has urged them to desist from any further escalation of the dispute in the meantime. Look, I do understand how difficult it is for people, and we all know once Christmas is over, people start saving for that summer holiday, and they save every week, whether it's in the local credit union. I often saw the case the children would come in with the money because they were so excited about going on their summer holidays, and it's awful for parents to have to break this news to their children that they can't go, and my heart goes out to them, it really does. But can I just say the government is doing everything that we can. We're using the industrial relations machinery, which you well know, Deputy, is the mechanism whereby these disputes are resolved. And can I just say that the Taoiseach met with the union and employer representatives on Monday through the LEAF, that's the Labour Employer Economic Forum, and he took the opportunity to highlight the government's concerns about the economic, the consumer and the reputational impact of the industrial dispute. And I would urge all parties to encourage Aer Lingus and the Irish Airline Pilots Association to engage with the industrial relations machinery of the state to reach a negotiated outcome. Intensive efforts must be made by both parties to avoid further disruption which impacts the travelling public and the wider economy. And I hope that both sides will maximise the opportunity that's there in the Labour Court, and I really would say to them, get back to the table.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy. Well said.
The greatest respect to the Taoiseach Minister. Whatever it was he said on Monday didn't work because the industrial action started as a minute past midnight today. And people, as you rightly say, are facing into a chaotic summer now. They have spent all of this year working hard. They have spent all of this time saving up, and they're looking in now. You tell me that your heart goes out to them. Mine does too. But I put a fairly simple question to you, Minister. It was, what are your government prepared to do? Now, you said in your response that the government are doing everything that they can. Are you telling me genuinely that everything they can do amounts to simply saying your heart goes out to them? Because I do think that people would like to see some decisive action from the government. I think they are looking now for leadership from the government, and they want to see a high-level intervention. And Minister, as I said in my opening remarks, this is not a run-of-the-mill dispute. This is not an ordinary common or garden industrial relations dispute. This is a dispute that threatens connectivity. That is why it is a matter for the government. So people don't want to hear sympathetic words, Minister. They want to know what it is that you and your government are prepared to do to help them.
Minister, please.
Thank you. Well, Deputy, you know better than most that we have very good industrial relations machinery within this state. The Labour Court did intervene, and they have a long history of resolving disputes, as you well know and I know as well, because these disputes will be resolved. They are always resolved in the end, but it's the pain that people have to go through in the interim. And can I say that we are committed and we have asked them to go back to the Labour Court. And what we need here, Deputy, is we need cool heads. We need to leave the egos at the door and get back into that negotiating room. I'm saying that to both parties. Get back into the negotiating room, because if everyone sticks to their own position, we're never going to find a solution. And as you and I know, a solution will be found. But I'm thinking, as you are, of those that can't go on their holidays. So I'm saying to them, start talking. This will be resolved. And to use the mechanism that is there is the Labour Court. And, you know, there has to be compromise. They have to talk. And, you know, it is concerning that the Labour Court met both parties yesterday and they were too far apart. So I would say, get back to the table, resolve this issue. There's a solution. There's always a solution.
Deputy Bacik, please.
Minister Humphreys, average house prices are now a whopping 35% higher nationally than they were at the start of the pandemic. And daft.ie tells us that in the past 3 months, house prices have risen again. Coupled with a spiralling cost of living and slow wage growth, owning a home is getting further and further out of reach for far too many people. And Minister, that fact is borne out by the survey published today by Threshold, their annual tenant sentiment survey. And it shows that a staggering 94% of renters are not renting by choice. They're renting because they've no other option, and they are trapped in a rental casino. Their weak rights and protections mean they can be evicted at short notice for almost any reason, and they're handing over, typically, a massive amount of money for the privilege. Indeed, 3/4 of those surveyed report struggling to cover the cost of their basic expenses after paying their rent. So, Minister, these findings show an overwhelming majority of renters don't want to rent, but they've no other option. And what are they supposed to do? What is a person supposed to do today when trying to find a roof over their heads in the worst housing crisis in the history of this state? A housing crisis I've described as the civil rights issue of this generation. Minister, a mortgage is out of reach for countless people, particularly for those who are single, for those who are living in cities. Even your own affordable schemes are out of reach for many people even on good salaries. Just look at the Oscar Trainerwood scheme in Coolock. And renting is now neither affordable nor available for those who cannot scrape together the money for a deposit to buy. There are schemes in place. There are schemes, we acknowledge that. But most of them are so bureaucratic, they're impossible to access, and none of them meet the real actual level of need. Take the cost rental tenant in situ scheme, a good idea in principle, which we in Labour had called for. But in recent weeks, I've been supporting people from Dublin, from Kerry and from Limerick, all of whom have been locked out of the scheme due to unnecessary bureaucracy. So it's not working in practice. Take the couple, both in full-time employment, who've been renting in the private sector for 20 years, who recently received a notice to quit and are now facing the awful prospect of homelessness, despite being eligible for the scheme because the housing agency is stringing them along, refusing to approve the vital purchase which would keep them in their own home. Minister, the homelessness figures for May will be released on Friday, and I'll be doing all I can to ensure that that particular couple and so many more are not represented in next month's homeless figures. But Minister, your government is nearing the end of your term, and for all the launches and glossy reports, the housing plans and schemes have not worked. They haven't worked to address the root problem that housing is treated by your government as a market commodity and not a common good. And what schemes exist are so shrouded in red tape as to be inaccessible to those who most need them. So, Minister, what will you do over the summer, in particular, to address the flaws in that cost rental tenant in situ scheme? And what will you do to ensure that people have the necessary supports to keep a roof over their heads, to keep them in their own homes?
Thank you, Deputy Bacik. Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, for raising this issue. Just to say that the issue, of course, as we all know, is supply, and the only way to address all of the issues is to increase supply, and the government has been doing that. Over 32,000 housing units have commenced in the first 5 months of 2024. That's around the same number as for the whole of 2023. 500 individuals or couples are buying their first home every single week, which is also the highest first first-time buyer activity since the property crash. No option is off the table when it comes to housing. We're in the business of looking for more ideas, more novel approaches, more innovative ways to continue to increase housing supply. When it comes to house prices, the most important indicator is how house prices compare to people's incomes, and that continues to remain relatively stable, and that's why 500 families are buying their first home every single week. You mentioned the cost rental tenants in situ scheme. This allows tenants to continue to reside in the property with the ultimate aim of transitioning these properties and tenants to be to the standard cost rental framework over the longer term. 97 properties have had bids accepted or have been acquired to the end of Q4 2023 since the launch of the scheme on the 1st of April 2023. The Department continues to work with local authorities to ensure that there is sufficient capacity in emergency accommodation. So there's a lot happening there, but we are seeing the results. You mentioned homelessness. I know the figures are out at the end of this week, and we do know that there are too many people and too many children in emergency accommodation. However, context is important. Families become homeless all the time for various reasons, and the most common reason is relationship breakdown. And we can never stop that from occurring, but we will continue to help families to avoid entering emergency accommodation and help them exit as soon as possible if they do. And it's important to say that when we talk about homeless families, they're not living on the street. The state is providing these families with accommodation, and it's something that we continue to work on. We are making progress, there's no doubt about that, and we do accept that there is more to be done, and we will continue to work hard and come up with, with the schemes that we have in place. There's no stone will be left unturned in terms of housing, and I have to say Minister O'Brien is working extremely hard and effectively on this issue.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Bacik.
I'm troubled by your reply. Of course we all agree that the key issue here is achieving increased supply, increased delivery of homes. I couldn't agree more with you, but the problem is your government has not done enough to address this. Even your own targets in Housing for All are clearly and patently too low. And we've been promised the publication of increased targets by government for many months now. The Taoiseach said again, I think just yesterday, that the revised upwards target would be published eventually in autumn of this year. But that's far too late. So we're not seeing either an increase in ambition or the necessary increase in urgency to ensure that there is the delivery of the homes there. And when I ask you a specific question about a specific scheme, you tell me 97 properties. That's a drop in the ocean for the thousands of people in emergency homelessness, over 4,000 children, as you've acknowledged yourself. And the schemes that are there are just not working. So, Minister, can I repeat my question and ask what you're going to do for those who are trying to make the government-backed schemes work in order to keep them and their children and their families in their homes? How will you commit to tweaking the cost rental tenant in situ scheme to make it work? Because it's just not working. And I've given you one very specific example of a couple for whom it should be working and it patently isn't. So what will you do to address this?
Please.
Thank you, and thank you, Deputy. Well, I'm happy to take the example that you give me, and I'm happy to get the details off you later, and I'll raise it with the Minister, because if there are issues that need to be changed to make it work better, we're happy to take on board views, there's no doubt about that. But what I am saying to you is that we continue to offer a suite of different supports in the housing sector. And we believe they are working because, as I said at the outset, 32,000 housing units have commenced in the first 5 months of 2024. That is progress. That is about achieving what we want to do, which is produce more houses. And the only way, as I said, to address this is increase the supply. The government, comes at affordability through different issues such as the increase in supply, the help to buy, the first home scheme, and the tenants in situ scheme is something that is it does work. I know of people who had good tenants, they wanted to move the property along, the local authority bought it and they were able to continue to stay on in the property. And I think that's important because people are in their houses, they're allowed now to stay on as local authority tenants.
Now, Deputy Noel Grealish on behalf of the regional group.
I have raised various issues relating to law and order with several Taoiseach and Ministers for Justice going back over the years. I have produced figures in this House showing how more than 32,000 crimes a year are being committed by offenders while out on bail, an increase of 41% on the total of 10 years ago and amounting to about 90 crimes every day of the year. Minister, we are paying out more than €75 million a year to pay for free legal aid in criminal cases, very often footing the bill for serial offenders with hundreds of previous convictions who don't have to make any contribution to their defence. And Minister, 4 out of 5 burglars released from prison in Ireland go on to re-offend within a short period, more than half of them within a year of their release. Overall, 3 out of 5 offenders released from custodial sentences re-offend within 3 years, most of them within the first 12 months. Minister, figures I have received from the court services show that people are apparently ignoring fines imposed by the courts in respect of various breaches of the law. Currently, up to 3/4 of the fines imposed by the courts in Ireland are going unpaid. Last year, more than 15 million of the 20 million plus in fines imposed were not paid. And the total value of unpaid fines over the past 5 years amounts to more than €48 million, and that's from the court services. So far this year, more than 43,000 of the 60,000 plus fines imposed by the courts during 2023 are still outstanding. A total value of more than 15.2 million remains unpaid. Many of these fines were imposed in respect of serious offences and were obviously intended to act as a deterrent against further breaches of the law. But the figures I received show that most people simply ignore them. For instance, there were more than 5,700 fines imposed last year on people convicted of public order offences, but only about 1,300 of them were paid. In the past 5 years, a total of 144,000 fines have gone unpaid. In that period, enforcement sanctions were only imposed of 3,300 offenders. And Minister, that's the figures that I have got from the court services that they supplied to me earlier this year. Minister, with over €48 million outstanding in fines for the last 5 years, what does your government propose to do to recoup that money?
Thank you, Deputy Grealish. Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. And the point you make is absolutely correct. There's a lot of fines outstanding there that haven't been paid. And if you're due to pay a fine, well, I think that you should be paying it. If you don't pay it, I think the route is back into court again, as I understand it. And then you and I will be faced with situations where people who didn't pay maybe relatively small fines have been brought back into the courts and maybe facing a custodial sentence. And then, you know yourself what happens then. Sometimes there's a lot of concern about that. But I do agree that we need an effective, an efficient and a robust criminal legal system. And the Department of Justice is currently working to reform how criminal legal aid works. And as part of this work, the Minister has published the general scheme of the Criminal Justice Legal Bill 2023. And this bill will outline the operation of the criminal legal aid scheme. It will introduce strengthened oversight and governance structures, and I can confirm to the Deputy that the general scheme is currently with the Office of Parliamentary Counsel for drafting. And it's important that proper assessments are carried out when deciding if a person can qualify for criminal legal aid. And that's why this new legislation will allow the courts, where the courts might consider it warranted, to refer an applicant to the Legal Aid Board for an assessment of their financial circumstances to be carried out under regulations to be drawn up under the terms of the bill. The board will then be able to recommend that a person can afford to contribute to their legal costs rather than have the entire bill borne by the taxpayer, and a court will make the final decision in the matter. However, I am informed that to restrict access to criminal legal aid for repeat offenders would be found to be unconstitutional. Any unreasonable block on legal aid could give a convicted person an avenue for appeal and delay the outcome of the case even further. To do so would run contrary to the protection of our democracy and the rule of law. So it's important for me to emphasise that the law in relation to bail is comprehensive and has been strengthened on a number of occasions over the years, most recently in 2017. The Department of Justice is currently working on the modernisation of the criminal legal aid and have and will continue to engage with all relevant stakeholders, including the legal professions, on the modernisation and funding of the legal aid system. Deputy, I take the point you raise, and you know, it is concerning when people don't pay their fines, and I will raise it again with the Minister, but it is something that is a bit of a bugbear of many. When people are fined, that is the penalty, and they should pay their fines.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Grealish.
Minister, a lot of people refusing to pay fines could be repeat offenders who have no respect whatsoever for the law. And I'm sure it's very frustrating for An Garda Síochána, who carry out investigations, bring offenders to court only for them to get off scot-free without paying fines or being punished for their crimes. Minister, we have to show the law-abiding citizens of our country that people who go before the courts and are fined are made pay. Whatever that be, a payment or deduction from their social welfare or wages, they must be made pay for the crimes. And Minister, in your department, if somebody gets overpaid their social welfare payment or a pension, and there's an investigation and they found wrongdoing, then the money is deducted out of their future payments. Every person has a PPS number, and I'm sure a lot of people that go before the court are either getting wages or getting a social welfare payment. So if they don't pay the fine, after a period of 6 months, it should be deducted out of their social welfare or their salary. Hit them where it hurts, because if they don't pay the fine, they're going to keep re-offending. So, Minister, what measures do your government propose to do to ensure that people who commit quite often serious offences are made pay for their crimes?
Thank you, Deputy Grealish. Minister.
Yeah, Deputy, I agree with you that people should pay. They should absolutely pay the fines that are imposed upon them, and if they don't pay them, well then there should be some way of deducting it, you're right. But if they don't pay their fines, I think they actually could be brought back into court again, because that's an offence. If you don't comply with the ruling of the court. Look, they do have certain rights, though, I have to say. Repeat offenders have certain rights as well, even though it can be frustrating to see them appearing time and time again and getting free legal aid. I fully understand that. The European Convention on Human Rights provides that every person charged with a criminal offence is entitled to defend themselves in person or through legal assistance of their own choosing, or if they have insufficient means to pay for legal assistance, to be given it free when the interests of justice so require. As mentioned, the criminal legal aid scheme must operate with due regard to these rights. Any unreasonable block of legal aid could give a convicted defendant an avenue for appeal or prohibition of the prosecution.
Thank you, Minister.
Look, Deputy, I absolutely take on board what you're saying, and I will certainly raise the matter again with the Minister for Justice, because it's only right and proper that if a fine is imposed, that you pay the fine, you pay your dues back to society for whatever reason it was imposed on you. You should pay it.
Thank you very much. We move now to the Rural Independent Group and Deputy Mattie McGrath.
And Minister, I want to also, on behalf of the Rural Independents, pay tribute to the late Tommy Gorman, wonderful journalist, wonderful person, and indeed he visited Tipperary, the Circle of Friends Cancer Care, gave up his time there only some months ago, and was in my own parish some weeks ago as well. Wonderful man, and he's likes near every here down the reach. Minister, the response of your government and TDs that the EU will take care of us and that we cannot go it alone in relation to the migration issue is naive in the extreme. There are lots of measures Ireland can take independently, and people do not realise that the EU is part of the problem. It is fundamentally undemocratic to vote a pact as a whole when each measure was voted on and debated separately in the EU, indeed for a period of 10 years. As I said, why the indecent haste? Why is the rush? There's no time limit on voting on this pact, so why do we rush to vote? tonight here in the Chamber after so little scrutiny. I do not believe this is what the Irish people voted for in the Lisbon Treaty back all those years ago, namely that the government, with a whip, would mandates, would use such measures as the whip to usher in the Migration Pact 15 years later, which will bring about a life-altering situation for the Irish people without resource to either judicial scrutiny or another referendum so that the people can vote on. Article 29, 4 and 7 of our Constitution, which authorises the Oireachtas to vote in this measure under Protocol 21, does not absolve any member of this House of the Oireachtas from their fiduciary duty or indeed moral responsibility to the people of Ireland to ensure that any and all such measures which affect the people will have had the benefit of judicial scrutiny and or an opportunity to vote in a referendum on this issue. It is morally reprehensible, I believe, and negligent of all such members of the House to vote in this pact in such circumstances, and by so doing, deny the opportunity to the Irish people to have the constitutionality of this pact tested by the courts. This is not what the Irish people voted for in Lisbon, by a long shot. This pact will involve the single transfer of our sovereignty, biggest transfer of our sovereignty in the history of our state. To give that away in a simple vote without any scrutiny or consideration of the constitutional implications will go down in the history of the state as the greatest ever betrayal of the Irish people by their own members of Parliament. And if this Migration Pact is voted in and we opt into this pact, we can never opt out. Thereafter, because the necessitated obligations in clause Article 28(4)(6) of our Constitution will apply, and these measures can never be tested by the courts, and our fate is set.
Corla, and thank you, Deputy, for raising this. The EU Pact on Migration and Asylum will be a game changer for Ireland. It will speed up the processing of asylum seekers so that we have a firmer and a fairer system. It will make it easier to return those who are found not to be entitled to protection. It will introduce greater security checking of applicants. Ireland can't do this on its own. We need cooperation, and we need other countries to be willing to accept people who shouldn't be processed here. It does not mean that the EU will make the decisions for us. This pact offers us all in Europe a real opportunity to work together to design a system that's firm but fair, based on a fair sharing of responsibility that works for everyone. We are not waiting for the pact to take effect to make changes. A significant increase in processing in the IPO. There's accelerated processing for designated safe countries, with 8 further countries under review. That has reduced applications by 50% from those countries. Steps to reduce the numbers arriving without documents are down by 34%. The review of airline fines are underway, and plain doorstep operations are underway. We have introduced visa controls on a number of additional countries, with further countries under review. We have increased the focus on assisting people to leave. The Dáil and the Seanad are fully debating approving Ireland's request to opt into the Pact, and I have to say that all extra speaking time has been allocated for this week. If approved, Minister McEntee will start to prepare the general scheme of new legislation to replace the International Protection Act 2015, and an implementation plan will be launched. And then, when that new scheme is complete and is prepared, that will go through all the houses of the Oireachtas. It will be subject to pre-legislative scrutiny. It will then go through the houses of the Dáil here, and then through the Seanad. So there will be loads more opportunity for people to give their views on it. And can I just say, Deputy, that you referred to our health service. You well know, and I well know, that our health service would not operate without migration into this country. We benefit every day. Well, you mentioned it earlier, we benefit every day from people who come to work in this country. Migration plays an essential role in our society and our economy. We have a rules-based immigration system that's both firm and fair, and it's vital to ensure the integrity of that system and that it is robust enough to cope with complex and fast-changing migratory patterns, and that pact will do just that. Thank you.
But I do acknowledge the wonderful service that the nurses and doctors and all kinds of specialities given. I've been beneficiary myself of that, but you're trying to distract again. I never mentioned it today. Minister, the people voted in 2009, the Lisbon, and they didn't vote for this. That's one thing sure and certain. So your government has scant regard for articles of the Constitution or the people's decision, as far as I'm concerned. And why are we rushing this? You said there will be legislation, yes, but if we vote opt into this tonight, we can never opt out. That's as clear as the nose on our faces. We can never opt out. So you're denying. You talk about debate. There was no debate here in this House. There was statements. There was no questions. No questions, answers, none, and no proper scrutiny. One meeting of the committee where the minister was unable to answer any questions, and that day I was there myself. And then the next meeting of the committee, kind of an add-on, brought in all the NGOs to wheel them out to tell us what we weren't doing right. The people who are running this country now, the NGOs. But this, in fact, is a total betrayal of the people of Ireland to vote this in by this Oireachtas without going to the people or having it tested in the High Court, and I couldn't be emphasised that strong enough. Surely it's such a serious issue that took 10 years in the EU, and we're going to vote here after 3 or 4 days debate without any questions and answers, as I said, or any scrutiny. That is bad lawmaking, and it's bad for our people, and it's ceding majorly our sovereignty, and that's, literally, in my opinion, is shameful and criminal.
Thank you, Cairn Deputy, there were 6 hours in committee on this debate on the EU Migration and Asylum Pact. 6 hours in committee, and yeah, there was 6 hours in committee. And believe it or not, you mustn't have known, but they ran out of speakers. I understand, and all the speaking time was given here. There was extra speaking time allocated last week. If I remember, we had a vote on. I think you voted against that extra time. I think so. So there was open-ended time yesterday. So there has been ample time to discuss this. There's been ample time. And as I said to you there earlier, the legislation, when it's ready to go through the Houses, there will be more than sufficient time then too, because you'll be able to go to pre-leg scrutiny, then you'll be able to have second stage, then you have committee stage, then you'll have report stage in the Dáil, and then you'll have final stage, and then when you finish all that, you can go to the Seanad. Well, you can't go to the Seanad, but there'll be an opportunity for the Seanad to debate it. So there's a lot of time there, Deputy. I don't know. Look at.
No,
Thank you.
Please, Minister, without interruption. That concludes Leader's questions for today. Thanks be to God. And we move to questions on promised legislation. Our first question is from Deputy